position coaches a lot of money. Some programs have to pay their coordinators a lot of money because they don't really feel so great about their head coach, that the coordinators are kind of part of the package deal to make folks feel better about what might be a lesser head coach, a less substantial head coach. And so once again, it kind of shines the spotlight on the true strength of a program. To me is measured by how well you're paying those assistant coaches, those position coaches, those guys that are either young or coveted. That, do you force that guy to go be a play caller at blah, blah, blah State University or the head coach at some group of 5 school or whatever else if he wants to get money? Or can you give him those kinds of commensurate raises while he's still there at UGA? As I said before, I'm a little bit of a weird guy. Maybe I'm the only one who kind of sees it that way, but I don't have a lot of emotional investment in Kirby Smart's contract. This seems to be a bigger media story than a fan story to me, but nonetheless, all power to him. Good luck on that. Scott Harris does give you a little Teddy KGB with the pay that man his money. I don't do accents very well, but I do love the movie Rounders, and I certainly love the line from Teddy KGB on all of that. Mark Thomas T-Bone96 says 69 more days to kick off. Certainly that's very nice. Mark Morris says, we're still flying under the 2022 radar with the national media. I'm absolutely okay with that. Fine with that, he says. Yeah, I think a lot of Georgia fans are. I think a lot of Georgia fans like the idea of Georgia kind of sneaking up on people, or like the idea of Georgia not really being overrated. I think that's the kind of the one thing that fans don't want to be. They don't want to be overrated. They don't want to be, unfortunately, like say what Georgia was in 2008 when it was preseason number 1. I'm talking about the official polls had Georgia preseason number 1, but by week 2, Georgia had already lost its number 1 ranking. The whole thing just sort of felt a little bit soft, and then Georgia didn't play very well against Alabama early in the season, and kind of the rest was sort of, unfortunately, a negative chapter in history because of that. I think fans just don't want to be overrated. And the one thing you kind of get the sense on this Georgia team is they are clearly not overrated right now, because teams like Alabama and Ohio State, by the way, more on that in a moment, but teams like that are clearly getting more attention, more hype here right now. DT says, I am like Robin Hood. Is that because I'm stealing from the rich and giving to the poor? I don't know that I'm doing that. And like I said, I don't have any beef with Kirby. I mean, if Georgia pays him $10 million, that's fine. If Georgia paid him $20 million, I don't think I'd bat an eye at that. I really don't think that. I mean, like, I'm of the belief that not only are coaches worth the money that you pay them, for the most part, a successful coach is so valuable to your program that I think it's also worth the buyout you have to pay to get rid of the guy that's not successful. And I know it's not my money, so it's easy for me to say this, but that's how valuable I think a great coach is. Not only do I think that you could pay that guy almost anything if he's successful, if he's truly running your program in an efficient way, and you could receive back a multiple of that amount of money. Not only do I believe that, as I said before, whatever you have to pay to get rid of a guy that's not good so you can hire a guy that is good, I think that coach is worth enough to be able to do that there as well. Now, where you get yourself in trouble is when you start having back-to-back coaches who are not successful, and all of a sudden you're paying a lot of money for a very limited amount of success. That's where you get yourself in trouble. But if you have to fire a bad coach, pay a big buyout so that you can hire a better coach, financially it's almost always a wise decision, because you're going to make a whole lot more money on the other side. And somebody else was talking about, Larry Wheeler 72 says the Chiefs only as good as the people surrounding him. Yeah, I think that's just where you measure program strength, right? I mean, I just think that, for those of you that pay attention, like stocks and things like that, or stonks as they call them these days, for those of you that pay attention to some of this kind of stuff, like, what's the best corporation? The one that has the best CEO, or the one that has the best? And by the way, welcome into all the other video platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all of that. Good to have you on video. We're talking about Kirby Smart, the contract that could be imminent for him. I know Mike Griffith has written about this at DawgNation.com. And the point that I was making earlier was, hey, I'm fine with Kirby getting whatever he gets. I think he deserves it. I don't have a whole lot of emotional stake in that. But when a guy like Todd Hartley gets a big raise, tight end coach, to me, that's where you demonstrate your program strength, how well you're able to pay your position coaches, those young up-and-coming guys, or guys that could go be, make parallel moves, be head coach at group of 5 level, something like that. Can you pay them enough where they don't really look around too much? Can you pay them enough where they don't really look to go other places? To me, that's one of the ways in which you demonstrate program strength. We're talking about how, like, in corporations, it's the same kind of thing there as well. The corporations that perform the best, the ones that have, not just necessarily the best CEO, although that's probably a good thing to have, but also those that just have the best people, beyond that, the infrastructure of people, the people resource you have in an organization that determines the success of a business. I think football teams are very much the same way on that. So we're live on the other video platforms. Let's take a couple more comments and we'll get into this here in a minute. Baggins says that Kirby's like a great war chief. The best warriors want to follow him. And we're going to talk more about this a little bit too, in that I think that Kirby Smart as a leader, and I know that when you start talking about leadership and things like that, you sort of get into sort of blowhard territory. I do realize that. But I think that we're in kind of an interesting age. As Kirby gets a little older, he's moving into year 7 as a coach, I believe that's right. He's, kind of on the other side of 45 now. And so he's starting to move into what I think is kind of the prime of his professional life here. And I think that we're starting to see a very interesting snapshot of Kirby Smart as a leader. I think almost anyone, when they get into a field to begin with, they spend time emulating other people. Like when I first started doing things like this, radio shows, things like that, I'm almost certain that I was doing a bad imitation of so-and-so that had done this job somewhere else at some point in time, things like that. You probably just can't help but do that. I think that almost anybody who moves into a field for the first time starts their career by emulating other people who've maybe had success in the field they want to be in. And for the people that kind of knocked Kirby at the beginning of his coaching career of, this guy's just a carbon copy of Nick Saban. This guy's just replicating everything that Nick Saban's doing. He's essentially copying off Nick Saban's paper. Well, guess what? In 2016, maybe going into 2017, maybe there's an extent to which that was true, because that's probably true for a lot of people when they begin work in any field. But now here, mid-40s, 7 years into a job, I think you would say that Smart is no longer emulating every single thing that Nick Saban's doing. In fact, in a lot of ways, Smart and Saban have become quite different. And to me, to go back to the point I was making, the kind of evolution of Smart as a leader, I think one of the things you're seeing, and we're going to talk more about this pretty in depth in a moment, but I think one of the things that you're seeing is Smart is really developing a comfort in going against the grain. Smart is developing a little bit of a comfort in being way on the other side of a lot of growing trends, and a huge number of respected names moving in one direction is not necessarily enough to convince Smart that he should be doing the same thing there as well. And I think that's interesting. That's not always going to work out, right? And sometimes when you fail being different than everybody else, it sets yourself up for more criticism. But as best I can tell thus far, Smart's kind of okay with that. We're talking about business earlier. Hemingway says, please don't mention 401ks. Hemingway, I know right where you are on that. Woo boy. What a tough time there is on that. William Perry checking in to say, go Dogs. Love to see that. William, thanks for being here. So a lot of folks having a good time. So we're going to have a fun time on the show today. I'm going to do more of what I was just kind of talking about before. One way in which right now, maybe a few examples of this, but one in particular we're going to talk about in a moment, where Kirby Smart is just quite content to be very different than a lot of other big-time coaches, big-time contending programs. That has worked out pretty well for Georgia before. Will it work out again? We will find out soon, and we'll talk about it on today's show. Also, there's a little bit of praise out there for probably the guy that I think we would all agree is Georgia's best player on paper right now. And I think it leads us to make a pretty simple point about UGA for the upcoming season. I like simple points when I can make them because complicated points are difficult for me to understand. So we'll do some of that with you coming up. There is a reminder that the big-time recruiting stuff for Georgia ain't slowing down anytime soon. We'll give you that. Mike Griffith. Also, some interesting news around the rest of the college football world as it relates to recruiting, including a very similar story to one we covered yesterday. One day later, once again, similar situation for one of the top programs in the country. We'll talk about that. What do you say we get into it? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm going to tell you something about me you're probably not surprised to hear. in life, I'm not really what they call like an early adopter. You know, I'm talking about like the people who are like first to embrace new stuff, first to embrace new technology, especially. Now, that doesn't mean I don't ever move to whatever the new thing is, but I'm just a lot happier in life when I let people try stuff out for a little bit and let them tell me if they think it's good or not. And if people who are smart and people who are probably braver than me want to move into like new stuff, like I'm just happier to let them try first. Like I remember the first time anybody talked to me about Twitter. This is going back many, many years ago, of course. And they're like, oh, it's this like, at the time they called it like a micro-blogging site. You could send a short message to people. And my first response is, why don't you just send them a text message? Like I had no vision for what like Twitter could be, how big of a platform it could be, how much easier it'd make communicating with a lot of people. I just had no vision for that whatsoever. I was a real late adopter to Twitter because that's just kind of the way that I do. Same thing with like, are y'all old enough to have had a TiVo? Like now everybody just calls them DVRs, but it used to be you called them TiVos. And I remember the very first time I heard about a TiVo, once again, I was like, well, I've already got a VCR. Why do I need this TiVo thing? And I had just had no vision for how cool that was going to be because eventually I grew to love my TiVo and then switched to regular DVR. And now that sort of seems to come standard with the cable box. But the point is that when I first heard about it, the whole thing just seemed to be like an unnecessary level of technology just because I didn't quite have the vision to understand how cool that it would be. And that's kind of the story of my life over and over and over again. Fun new things get introduced. I don't quite know what they are, but if enough people that I trust try it, they say they like it, eventually I'll kind of move in that direction there as well. In other words, it's not that I am completely resistant to and unwilling to change. I just sort of like to change slowly. And I think that there's an example of that that's also true with Kirby Smart. Now, not necessarily related to technology, things like that. I honestly don't know what Smart's relationship with that kind of stuff is. But there are examples of Smart, Kirby Smart, the Georgia coach, on field as a coach that shows that Smart is certainly not unwilling to change. You can look at examples of his time over the course of being at Georgia where he has moved in a different direction than maybe he once was. But he does these things just more slowly than other people do. And I do think that's a real hallmark of quality leadership. I think successful people in life make up their mind quickly and then change their mind slowly. I just think that's kind of one of the recipes, for success in life, that when you have been convinced that something is the right thing, whether it be a principle or a tactic, when you are convinced that something's right, it ought to take you a long time and a lot of evidence to maybe move, in the direction that that you might have been wrong on. You don't want to be kind of bouncing from one thing to the next very, very quickly because you never plant enough roots to truly enjoy great success in life. I think that Kirby Smart is an example of that. Now, my reason for saying all of that is to sort of say this. I saw an interesting quote as it relates to Georgia the other day, and I thought, that's probably worth at least spending a few minutes on the show. It comes from a guy named Bill Conley, who was on a college football podcast called the Solid Verbal. Now, Conley's one of these like math dudes, like analytics type experts, and I've told you before, like at one point in time, I probably very much openly embraced like the fancy stats in college football and some of the advanced metrics that were gaining a lot of steam and popularity. The honest truth is I probably embrace some of that kind of stuff less than I used to. After all the years that it's been present within the sport, I don't think it's gotten more conversational to discuss it. That's one of the reasons why I've probably taken a step back from analytics a little bit. The other thing is, after all these years, I don't quite think some of those stats have proven to be quite as predictive as maybe some of the people who've been the architects of those stats were hoping they would be or say that they are. So in some respects, I probably don't embrace the kind of analytics that Bill Conley's famous for as much as I probably used to, but I do still think that Conley's kind of an interesting voice in the sport, and I guess I still do care about his opinion, even though I don't quite buy into his line of thinking as much as I used to. So with all that said, Conley, a guy who writes for ESPN.com and has been at the forefront of the kind of fancy stats in college football for a long time, was on this podcast the other day, and he was talking about how the national championship contenders all stack up. And one of the things that the analytics folks have been open about is, in this day and age of player movement and so much changeover in rosters from year to year to year, how do you kind of measure that from a statistical standpoint? And as you might imagine, it's gotten more difficult to do. And that may be true for a lot of teams around the country. But Conley says There are actually probably a couple of teams where that's not really quite so true for at all, and the one that he mentions prominently here is the one we care about on the show. It's the Georgia Bulldogs. I think we may have this quote. Can we show this? This is Bill Connelly on the Solid Verbal podcast talking about his feelings about Georgia, about why he thinks that Georgia right now, according to his advanced metrics, his preseason ratings, his power rating type stuff, he thinks Georgia is as easy to have a clear opinion on as anybody is. He writes on the podcast, he says, I mean, they have no transfers. They didn't take a single transfer this year. They did lose their defensive coordinator, so there's that. But, the offense, we kind of know what that offense is going to be. So what Connelly is saying here on the Solid Verbal podcast is, hey, you've got all this changeover in other places, but at Georgia, it's as easy to make a clear prediction of what you think they're going to be as any team in the country. And for what it's worth, Connelly's got Georgia third in his what he calls his SP+. That's his analytics rankings. He's got Georgia third behind Alabama and Ohio State. And in particular, to make the contrast here for a moment, he talks about how at Ohio State, this is a team that has been obviously great offensively. They were really, for the most part, below average defensively last year. And he says, if that team is like top 15 defense for the upcoming season, they're probably the best team in the country. And the honest truth is, I don't dispute what he's saying there. That if Ohio State can find some defense to play complementary with its offense, that probably is the best team in the country, and you would then understand why the Buckeyes have gotten all the hype they've gotten here this offseason. That's not an incorrect statement to make. Now, the word if is doing a lot of work in that statement because Ohio State has made a new defensive coordinator hire, and they are trying to up in some erosion on that side of the ball that's kind of gone back the last couple of years as Ohio State's gotten more explosive offensively. They've just gotten a little softer defensively. They have clearly become a more finesse-oriented team. They got shoved around mightily against Michigan there last year, so it's not obvious they will be able to upgrade on defense, but clearly that's what they're trying to do. And as Connelly says, it's unclear if they're going to be able to do that or not. There's more mystery surrounding Ohio State. But Connelly says when it comes to Georgia, there is very little mystery because they don't have any transfer players. Now, as a Georgia fan and as someone who talks to other Georgia fans for a living on this show, I'm left to conclude, okay, so Connelly says, I feel very confident about where I have Georgia. I've got them third behind Alabama and Ohio State. Is this a good thing or not? Now, Georgia fans would say, well, it's not good to be third. You want to be number one in the country. But and pushing that aside for a moment, the fact that Georgia is such an outlier around the rest of the country when it comes to like taking in transfers. I mean, the Alabama season this year is going to be, completely determined by how transfer players work out. Jermaine Burton and Jahmyr Gibbs and offensive lineman from Vanderbilt, additional wide receiver from Louisville. That the Alabama season in large measure is going to be determined by how well these transfers fit into what the Crimson Tide's trying to do. Georgia, by comparison, far different than that. And as I said before, Smart as a coach, a lot more comfortable than a lot of his contemporaries are at being different when it comes to these major trends. So is it good that Georgia doesn't have the kind of transfer players that add more mystery and intrigue into an upcoming season? And I think that obviously we won't know if it's good until we see the results at the end of the year. But I can't help but notice this, that being on the other side of quickly emerging trends has actually worked out pretty well for Georgia in the past. I mean, can't you say that that is what happened for Georgia on the field in 2021, at a time when the sport was embracing offensive football? Georgia was a little more defensive oriented. And in 2021, it just so happened the sport actually moved in Georgia's direction, and Georgia used that to the tune of winning a national championship. Georgia was moving against the tide of a trend, no pun intended, and it actually worked out to the tune of national championship success. I'd say the same thing is kind of going on for Georgia recruiting right now, whereas the conversation around Georgia's 2023 class is just so different than so many other conversations that are taking place nationally, where it seems like a lot of recruiting classes, whether you believe all the rumor and innuendo or not, are almost built solely on the back of NIL. And Georgia right now, whether it's reality or perception, just doesn't quite seem to be built that way. And it seems like Georgia for the moment is still selling other things other than just NIL opportunities. And clearly in 2022, in the 2023 recruiting cycle, you can't completely ignore NIL, but Smart seems to be content to say, hey, we're going to move a little slower on this. We're going to change our minds slowly even though everybody else seems content to change their mind really quickly, that actually moving a little slower, being a little more deliberate in our embrace of new stuff has actually worked out pretty well before. And just maybe on the field in 2022, this upcoming season, it'll be another example of that. That as Conley, the analytics expert from ESPN, says, Georgia's so different because there are no transfer players, at least new to the program for this year. Eric Gilbert, I guess, would sort of feel like a little bit of a version of that, but new to the program for this year, there just are no transfer players. And for Georgia, that seems to have kind of worked out before to be different than a lot of its other chief competition. And in fact, let me go back in time here for a moment to the end of spring practice. This was the G-Day press conference. And at the end of that press conference, near the very end of it, I think a lot of media folks were kind of assuming, okay, spring practice in the books, you see what you've got, you had your spring game, now you're going to turn your attention to bringing somebody in from the transfer portal, because at that time, late April, you still had until May 1st to kind of find out who was going to be in the portal. So now a lot of folks thought Georgia was going to be turning its attention to getting ready for that transfer portal and seeing who Georgia was going to add to its roster, the same way that a lot of other college football championship contenders seemed really, really eager to do some of these sort of waiver wire additions, that now it's going to be Georgia's turn to do that. But Kirby Smart just kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say he completely disregarded it, but he certainly didn't seem all that eager to add a new player even after spring practice was done. This is a reminder to him about what he said last April. This is Kirby Smart from back in the spring.
I don't even think of this next phase as transfer portal phase. I think of it as get stronger, get bigger phase. Like we have to get better. We got to physically get better. So we got to lift in May. We got to work out in May. We got to get some guys academically in a good place. And the guys that want to be here, we're going to coach them. The guys that don't, and we're not going to chase after them. We can't. You know, that's their determination. We're trying to create a culture of I want to be here and grow and get better. Like you come to Georgia, you get developed. So if I'm not the guy, at least I'm developing to be the guy. And we got a lot of examples of guys that stuck around and became really good players. You know, and Jalen Carter was a great example of that. And that's really my focus. It's not on who's in it, who's not in it.
When I have a bias, I want to try to be clear to you about what it is. I don't want to try to sneak up with you on some sort of hidden agenda. I'll lead with my opinion on this. I love that mindset from Kirby Smart. That's the kind of mindset that I hope works. Now it remains to be seen how much it's going to work for Georgia here this season. But given my preferences, that's what I'd like for my coach to say of actually we're going to lean in the direction of building up, training up, developing the players that we have, and we're going to make that our number one priority. And we're going to see if we can reward guys who've stuck around here and didn't tuck tail and run at the first sign of adversity, such as a Channing Tindall. That's sort of what I want my coach to say, so I have no problem telling you that I've got a little bit of a hidden agenda and a little bit of a bias in favor of that kind of talk coming out of a football coach. It's just an example of how football, I think, trains up future men. I just think it's good for men to have that kind of mindset within the sport. But in the present tense, the name of the game is winning. The name of the game is going out and repeating as national champions. And will that philosophy ultimately allow Georgia to end up doing that? I don't know. Obviously, we won't know until the results play out. But as I said before, we do have examples of this having worked in the past. Georgia's slow embrace of the offensive revolution worked out pretty well in 2021. Georgia's somewhat slow embrace of the current culture dominated by NIL, that still seems to be working out pretty well for the 2023 recruiting cycle. And maybe Georgia's slow embrace of a roster filled with transfer players, maybe that'll work out too. I mean, there is one distinction I want to draw here, and then after this we can move on and talk about something different. I told you off the top of the program I'm a little bit of a late adopter, that I kind of move into new ideas, new technology slower, but that doesn't mean I don't move in at all. And I think in one respect, Kirby Smart's kind of like that too. Contrast him to another top program, another top coach here for a moment, Dabo Swinney at Clemson. I think Dabo, when he has spoken about some of the stuff that exists in college football, I think that he's shown an unwillingness to embrace it at all, transfers in particular. That's not something that Dabo has wanted Clemson to have whatsoever. Kirby's not like that. Kirby's taken some transfer players, and I certainly believe that Georgia would have been willing to take a transfer player here this year. But Kirby's also not the kind of guy that is going to go crazy adding 6 and 7 transfers the way like an Ole Miss has or something else. So let's not make Kirby something that he's not. He's not a guy unwilling to add a transfer player, but he is a guy that's moved a little slow in that regard. And moving slower when it comes to some of the dominant trends in college football, that's worked out pretty well for Georgia before, and maybe here on the field in 2022, it will work out again. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Good to have you. 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Of course, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them on all the various podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between. We're so happy to have our friends at Breda Pest Management making the show possible for you today. I appreciate their support of us, but I also appreciate the chance to talk to you about them, because here's what I love about our sponsors. I feel so confident that they, services, products, whatever else, provide value to our audience. It's the kind of thing I want to make sure you know about, and this is what it comes to when it comes to Breda Pest Management, because as we were talking about with some commenters before the show began, everything's more expensive now, and that's just a real challenge for all of us. So where you can save money, you should, and that's where Breda Pest Management gives you a chance to do that. Your termite protection, your pest control protection there, your home, maybe every year for however many years in a row, your service provider has sent you a letter letting you know your service price is going to go up. Well, at Breda Pest Management, that's not going to happen. So make the switch to Breda Pest Management today and save money instantly when you do so. You already know that Breda Pest Management is the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. They're taking care of all the athletics venues, including Sanford Stadium. So you love the idea of that level of service, but it's the level of savings they provide that's probably top of mind for you right now. So make the switch to Breda Pest today. The website, bredapest.com. That's BREDA, bredapest.com. Make the switch. Save instantly when you get your pest control and your termite protection from our friends at Breda Pest Management. All right, we're going to get Mike Griffith here coming up in a couple of minutes. A lot of things to get into with Mike that have been going on with UGA, so we'll do some of that with him coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I do want to go briefly around the doghouse here. And, listen, Pro Football Focus, speaking of analytics, that's another one of these, I guess, sort of analytically minded websites. And you've heard Kirby Smart kind of take his jabs at PFF before. I would say that around here we have a little bit of a love-hate relationship. Admittedly, we tend to cite Pro Football Focus when it has some stats that sort of back up what our opinion is, and we tend to scoff at Pro Football Focus when some of their analytics work kind of shares something that doesn't quite make sense to us. So we tend to use these stats when they work to bolster our opinion, and we tend to ignore them when they don't, admittedly so. But nonetheless, they're producing content, and it's good off-season fodder, if nothing else. And I saw a tweet from them the other day as it relates to Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter, which I thought was really interesting. It's talking about pass rush win rate. It sounds complicated, but it's the idea of when you try to rush the passer, how frequently are you beating the offensive lineman? How frequently are you getting to the quarterback? So kind of makes sense, right? That's the name of the game. Shed a block, get free, get to the quarterback, doing that from the interior position there, whatever else. Well, last year, from a statistical standpoint, according to the people at Pro Football Focus, Carter was better at that than a lot of Georgia folks have been over the course of years. Can we show the PFF tweet here for a moment regarding Jalen Carter? So they say the highest pass rush win rates, by the way, it's not easy to say, pass rush win rates in a season for a Georgia defensive lineman. Leonard Floyd was at 27.9% in 2015, meaning he beat an offensive lineman, a little more than a quarter of the time. Azeez Ojulari in 2020 did that 24% of the time. And Jalen Carter did that 18.9% of the time there in 2021. So Carter right there among the very best Georgia pass rushers in terms of, beating an offensive lineman, getting to the quarterback, within the same, general vicinity of what Ojulari was there for Georgia in 2020, which obviously speaks to a pretty high level of achievement. And if you listen to Jalen Carter, one of the things is that while he was really good in 2021 and was earning a lot of praise, there's a lot of scouts who were saying last year, while Georgia had the Trayvon Walkers and the Jordan Davis and the Devontae Wyatts, that Carter had the look of that guy NFL draft scouts are going to be salivating over. People were already saying that about him last year. So he knows what it's like to have a lot of hype. And now moving into the season, which he's not just in the complimentary role along with these other great defensive linemen, he's totally out of their shadow. They've moved on, and now he is the centerpiece of the program. Once again, to go back to spring practice, Jalen Carter, when he spoke to the media, Carter typically kind of a soft-spoken guy. I don't think he'd ever spoken to reporters before since he's been at UGA, but it made it very clear in the press conference that he held back during the spring that this year he's ready to make good on all the projections from the analytics folks like Pro Football Focus, the predictions from blowhards like me that speak into a microphone. He's ready to go out there and show folks about what it means to be a former 5-star moving into your draft-eligible season. I loved this from Jalen Carter. Take a listen to this.
I work like different ways. I started running more after practice and all that because them guys motivated me to do more because they told me I could be top 10 pick and all that. So I've done a lot that I usually didn't do my freshman year. And I've just been working harder.
Yeah, you came in as a 5-star prospect. You've had expectations your entire time here. How have you, do you think you've gone about living up to those now, entering your junior year? What are your own sort of expectations entering this season?
I don't really know. The 5 stars is all cool and all, but I came here with a new start and new mindset, saying I got to earn everything I do. And just playing with them guys, I feel like I have done what was needed.
So that's really interesting from Jalen Carter saying, hey, listen, I've been a 5-star prospect. That's been my label, I guess, but now I'm ready to shed that. I saw the draft success that the Wyatts and the Jordans and the Trayvon Walkers had, and that motivates me to go out and train even harder so I can be that guy for the upcoming season. And almost universally, I think people do view Jalen Carter as that kind of player. Pretty weirdly, I don't think that Phil Steele had him among his All-American list. That just seems like a horrible omission and probably a blight on Phil Steele more so than anything on Jalen Carter. But other than that, almost universally, Carter is viewed as a top shelf, shortest of short list, big-time players. Now, all of this leads me to make a very simple point here for a moment. That, and we talked about this some yesterday, that the Georgia defense in 2022 kind of has the label of not quite being what the 2021 defense was. And we understand why that is. Georgia lost 5 first-round picks, Nakobe Dean, other key players, that there is clearly a lot missing from that 2021 defense. But let's just say magically we made the 2021 defense disappear, that it never happened. That all of a sudden now we're comparing the 2022 Georgia defense to the other previous defenses of the Kirby Smart era. We're talking about 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017, I guess even 2016. We're comparing the 2022 defense to the other defenses. 2021 simply does not exist. It's this current unit being compared to those previous units. For those of you that have good enough memories to think back on those years, was there ever a defense prior to 2021 that you would have felt as good about on paper as you do this defense right now because of the presence of a guy like Carter and other potential first-round picks? But let's just keep it to Carter here right now. Did any Georgia defense on paper going into a season have a player as good as Jalen Carter appears to be, not counting maybe 2021 here for a moment? I think the answer on that's pretty clear no. I mean, for everything that Roquan Smith turned out to be in 2017, he was not necessarily projected that way before the start of that 2017 season. I'd say the same thing is kind of true for Azeez Ojulari in 2020 there as well. That's another one of the great individual performers for Smart during his era as head coach. But it's not like he was obviously viewed to be that guy going into the 2020 season. He was certainly thought to be a very good player, but I think he stepped up and proved that he was even better on that. I don't know that Georgia has had, a guy on paper going into a season getting what I would say justifiable love the way that Jalen Carter is right now. And you could maybe say something similar about Nolan Smith and Keely Ringo. So important to add some context to all of this is all I'm trying to say. Clearly this defense is in the shadow of the 2021 defense right now. But if that defense were to kind of magically be erased as if it didn't exist, there's probably more justifiable excitement about this unit going into this season than any of the Georgia defenses prior to that under Kirby Smart. And, of course, Jalen Carter is a big reason why. That is Around the Doghouse. We are happy to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. And we're also happy to have Mike Griffith on the show today, too. So let's talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Bringing Mike Griffith here, a part of the program, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Of course, Mike's had some really good stuff at DawgNation.com over the last few days. I'm looking forward to talking to some about that with Mike. But let me just bring you in, Mike, on the conversation I was just having, which is, we understand why this 2022 defense kind of lives in the shadow of what the 2021 unit did. We totally, get all of that. But when it comes to the kind of attention that Jalen Carter's getting, both in terms of like the analytic stuff, but also just the natural opinion stuff or the draft scout stuff. Under Kirby Smart, it has been very rare for a player like this to get as much individual attention as Carter's currently getting. I mean, this is as good an individual player on paper as I think that Georgia's probably had under Smart going into the start of the season. And I know a lot of Georgia fans can't wait to see what he does there on the field, and I'm sure you're right there with him on that, Mike.
Yeah, that's a great point. But you don't often see guys do what Jalen Carter's done. I mean, the field goal block to me was the turning point of the national championship game. Alabama fans might say it was the play before when Jai Hall dropped the ball inside the 5-yard line, but the next play was Jalen Carter blocking a field goal, and that's a huge swing. That Alabama I think could have gone up 12-6 at the point. I think they were up 9-6 at that time. Could have gone 12. Instead, the very next play, Cook goes 67 yards. I mean, it's kind of the butterfly effect. What if Jalen Carter doesn't block that field goal, right? I mean, what if Bama kicks it and then they kick off and now they just added some points? And, to me, that was the play of the game. And then beyond that, this is a guy who's been a who's come in and he's been everything that he was supposed to be from day one. And really, and I think part of the credit also for our recognition of him goes to special guys like Jordan Davis, who sits there and tells us, hey, Jalen Carter's better than all of us. That's the Outland Trophy winner speaking. That's your first ballot Hall of Famer off of the national championship team. The first guy going in the Hall of Fame off that team last year is Jordan Davis, Bednarik, and Outland Trophy winner. Only the third player ever to sweep those two awards and the first player in the SEC to do it. And he's telling us there's a guy younger than him that's better than him on the team. And he's not joking around. And so, to your point, I think Jalen Carter is fantastic. I think it's exciting that Georgia has the preeminent defensive tackle in the nation. Is he a Ndamukong Suh proportion? Not yet. Aaron Donald, maybe not quite yet. But when we're thinking about the greatest defensive tackles in the last 10 years of college football, and we're going to make a list of 10 of them, could Jalen Carter be on that list? Absolutely.
What do you think about Georgia being such an outlier from a lot of the rest of the country? Certainly its chief competition, Alabama, and the fact that Bama is going to be a roster this season really heavily dominated by transfer players. Georgia doesn't have that kind of thing. It's not that Smart's unwilling to take transfers. He took some last year, but they're not going to have them this year. What do you think about Georgia being so different than such a prevailing trend around the rest of the sport?
Well, I think it says a lot for the amount of talent that Georgia accrued to begin with. That Georgia had 11 transfers in the portal, 7 out of the 2 deep, and 4 former starters, and nobody's really batting an eye over any of that. Anybody else loses 11 players and 7 out of the 2 deep and 4 former starters, you're going, oh my gosh, much less in a year when you had 15 guys drafted. And yet, to your point, we look at the promise of this roster and say, this team is going to win the East again, and maybe they'll be ready to beat Bama by the time they play in the SEC championship game. I do think that Georgia probably had to spend some money to keep guys. I think that's part of it too. You can't be going out and spending money on guys you don't have when you got guys you got to pay to stay, which is just the reality of the situation now with the one-time transfer in the NIL. So I think Kirby's done an unbelievable job with roster management. I think that's one of the reasons why Georgia won. I think that is the reason why Georgia won the national championship. That Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt did come back, and Justin Schaefer did come back, and all these seniors that decided one more year so they could get that chance. Without it, it doesn't happen, Brandon. It's just like the year before, if Bama doesn't convince, Najee Harris and Devontae Smith and, I forget the left tackle's name, the center, they had 6 first-round guys that are seniors. If they don't come back, and then I play the what-if game. What if Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift come back in 2020? Right? What if we go back and, what if some of these other, with Roquan Smith, what if some of these other guys come back for another? Is Georgia winning enough? Probably. So roster management is absolutely talent accrual, no doubt. Player development, check. But now roster management. And I think that's what Kirby Smart does as well as anybody in the country.
So you've written about the Kirby Smart impending contract here this week. And, going back to the spring meetings a few weeks ago, we certainly, were confirmed it was on its way. Obviously a big race for Kirby Smart. And, Mike, I have a little bit of a weird opinion about this in that, listen, I think Smart deserves whatever they give him. I'm happy to see him getting a raise. And, maybe this is just as simple of the contract just obviously ends any discussion that Smart might ever go anywhere else. If that was ever a living, breathing conversation before, huge raise would obviously seem to quiet that down. But beyond that, like, I don't know that from a fan's perspective that I get all that excited about whatever Kirby Smart is making. I mean, I think he deserves the money. I'm happy that he's getting it, I guess. But what do you think the fan takeaway should be from Kirby Smart about to be an even richer man than he already is?
Well, I think it's what you said, Brandon. I think it's the stability of the situation. And I think recruits are looking for that. I read one of Centel's recent stories. One of these last 4 commitments in the last week, hard to keep up with all the talent streaming in. And one of the things that Kirby talked to the recruit about was stability. And let's face it, if you're comparing Alabama and Georgia, one of your selling points if you're Georgia is, it's like if I was trying to sell you a car, Brandon, I could say, well, Brandon, I know you got your eyes on that 1990 Corvette. But let me tell you, that thing's got 100,000 miles on it. It's a classic. I got a 2022 Kirby Vet right here. This thing is still rolling. It's only 46 years old in human years, and it's coming right out. Where do you want, in other words, Nick Saban is ancient. Yeah. He's 70 years old. And that's why, listen, this contract clause, it brings up this. How fascinating is this? Jimmy Sexton is the most clever agent ever, and he also represents Kirby, and I know some fans are going, why are we talking about agent? Because this guy is the agent. He is the super agent. They need to make a movie or 30-30 on him. He's got a clause in Saban's contract. This is beautiful. Saban gets an extra $800,000 bonus after every year between 2022 and 2025. The only reason that bonus is there is to make sure that Nick Saban, he's got a base salary over $9 million, but we're going to give you another $800,000 just to make sure you don't get too old on us, make him come back another year. Just a brilliant strategy. It's something you can show. But honestly, if you were going to want to go play for a coach, would you want to go for the 70-year-old at Alabama and do what 6 other teams have already done? Or do you want to come to Georgia and carve your own niche and play for a 46-year-old coach named Kirby Smart and maybe wear these cool white helmets that nobody's ever worn before? Even though Georgia says they're not doing it next year, that's part of the attraction. Is that, hey, you can still, be one of the legends. You can be one of the guys. I mean, in Alabama, you just take a number. They've won 6 national titles here. Get in line. Which legend you want to talk to today? Georgia, you got one in 40 years. And you've still got some freshness and some newness to it.
This probably makes me weird, but I think we probably ended up talking more about Todd Hartley's big raise than we did Kirby Smart's, pending new contract, because in some respects, I just think that that's how you really demonstrate program strength. And this may sound like I'm down on the Kirby Smart contract. I'm not. I mean, Georgia could pay him $20 million a year, and I would be fine with it. I think that he's certainly worth whatever he makes. But when you've got a young, up-and-coming coach like Hartley, and you're able to make him the highest-paid guy at his position, that to me, there's almost a bigger flex in terms of how much you can pay your position coaches, because these are guys that are upwardly mobile. These are guys that are looking for career advancement. If you can give them the money so they don't become like head coach at blah, 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 Directional State University, or offensive coordinator at, some other place, that if you can give them the kind of money that keeps them happier longer, that there's a certain level of program stability that kind of comes from that, almost much more than paying the head coach. As I said before, that's not to be construed as I'm down on Kirby Smart and getting whatever he can get. But there was a part of me as a fan doing show for fans that was almost more energized by Hartley getting $650,000 than I was by Smart getting what might end up being $100 million. As weird as that sounds, that's probably the point of view that I've probably expressed on the show the last few days.
Well, I'll take your Hartley and raise you a Todd Monken $2 million.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think, I thought the Monken contract was pivotal. The lockdown, especially in the Manning recruitment. To your point, Georgia led the SEC last year in assistant coach salary pool, and that is really important. To your point, these other staff do try to poach guys off of it. Hey, listen, there's a reason Kirby Smart didn't give Cortez Hankton a raise for 2 years, because he was basically saying, you know what? If somebody else comes, Hank, I don't blame you a bit. But when you're giving these other guys a bump, Del McGee, I think he's making the same kind of money that Muschamp and Glenn Schumann is, right? So that tells you the value. At the end of the day, you're worth what the company pays you. People say whatever they want. But at the end of the day, you're worth what you're getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Del McGee. That's a perfect example of this. I mean, his contemporary at Alabama, Charles Huff, left a couple of years ago and went to become Marshall head coach. And listen, I don't begrudge McGee if he ever wants to be a head coach or something like that. But if you can convince a guy not to do that, if you can just get him to hold off on going and living in Huntington, West Virginia during the winter where it's going to be really, really cold, at least I think it's going to be cold up there. But if you can convince a guy to stay just a little bit longer, that stability that programs do desire, and that you're right, recruits do pay attention to, even in this modern age, that stability, that when you can keep a Monken for year 3, something that's not easy to do for a play caller, when you can keep Dell McGee for the long haul the way that Georgia has, when you prevent, like Dan Lanning could have taken the Texas job a year ago and gone being defensive coordinator. You held on to him for one more year. That to me, there is such a flex that comes from being able to pay assistants a lot of money that really does add up to be a pretty key ingredient in the recipe of building a great college football program.
Well, there's an old saying, you know it better than anyone, BA, happy wife, happy life. And we can talk about these guys making the money, but these guys ain't the ones spending the money because they ain't got the time to spend the money. And there's nothing wrong with the family having a nice house and being able to have nice vacations and bring their families in and entertain and send their kids to the best schools and have that security, because the coaching business is a whirlwind. There's no guarantee. You don't see many coaches last a long time at a school. It just doesn't happen. And assistant coaches even more so. And if you're an assistant coach, you're kind of at the mercy of your head coach. You'd be the best assistant coach ever, but if your head coach tanks, you're in trouble. Look at John Chavis, Tennessee defensive coordinator. Tennessee's defense was fine, but when the offense fell apart and Philip Fulmer got fired, guess who else got fired? The whole staff. Chavis, but good enough coach, landed somewhere else, goes to LSU, then he goes to Texas A&M, then he goes to Arkansas. I mean, you don't know where your next move as an assistant coach. That is a volatile field where you only have so much control. You work tireless hours away from your family. We've discussed that, which is why Matt Luke got out, right? And so your family needs to be taken care of. And it's the wife. I talked with David Cutcliffe. Great story for you here, BA. I was down at the SEC spring meetings a couple weeks ago, ran into Coach Cutcliffe. And when I was covering Bama in the 90s and Mike Dubose got hired, he told me he was going to hire these 3 or 4 coaches. And one of the coaches he said he was going to hire was David Cutcliffe, who was the Tennessee offensive coordinator. He said, Mike, this is going to happen. Me and Cutcliffe were roommates in college. We made a deal way back then that whoever got the first head coaching job was going to hire the other one. Cutcliffe's coming. Go ahead and write it. I went ahead and wrote it. What happened? Cutcliffe didn't come. I said, what happened? I don't know. He said he was going to come. He came back on it. Tennessee threw a little money at him. So I saw Cutcliffe at the SEC spring meetings a couple weeks ago. I said, hey, Cut, I got to ask you about something, man. This is way back machine here. I'm not writing it. But, 26 years ago, Dubose gets the job. You guys had this deal. You go, yeah, we did. We made that because they were roommates in college. People don't realize how they're not Cutcliffe and Dubose. He said, what happened was I went to my wife and I told her that we were leaving for Alabama. She said, well, you have a good time. I'm not leaving here. Because she was a teacher in the community. The kids liked their school. And she said, we're not doing it. So the coach thought he was going. The wife said, we ain't going. So sometimes when you see things like that, you go, wow, why in the world would a coach do that? Well, because he's got a pretty important person in his life named wife. And she's there to look out for him and look out for the best interest of the family. And these mothers and parents have more influence than you would ever imagine. I think Jeff Santel told us that in the Arch Manning recruitment. It ain't just the dad. You better talk to the mom. Yeah. There's a lot. Hey, Athens, those downtown shops, protect them. Women like coming here and going to the restaurants and the shops. I know that. I know you know that. Sure. I know your wife does. Take you around downtown Athens. You ain't getting out for a few hours, brother, because there's a lot of good places to eat and a lot of good places to shop. And there's a value to that. There's a value to that money. There's a value to that community, that environment. I think that's one of the things Georgia has going is the Athens community is it's unique. And to me, it's the best college community in the country.
I think it's really true. Last thing before we let you go, and this is kind of off the beaten path a little bit, but College World Series rolls on. You had SEC teams dominating that. You had 2 teams play from the SEC in the title series a year ago, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. It's a new crop of SEC teams playing there now. And Mike, one of my big wishes, I mean, I want to be – I've never been to the College World Series before. I want Georgia to be in Omaha so badly. I would say years ago, I probably didn't actually follow college baseball all that closely. It's just one of those sports I've just gotten way more into in recent years. And I don't know, you see a lot of the social media activity, the Auburn fans, the Ole Miss fans, Arkansas fans, A&M fans, the ones that have been there. This thing looks about as much fun as anything ever could be. Have you been to the College World Series before at any point in time? Because I tell you, one of my absolute ambitions is to be there with the Dogs here at some point in time because it looks about as much fun as anything.
Yeah, I did. I went there in the 90s. Alabama and Auburn both went the same year, believe it or not, and it was awesome. It's funny. I had to hit myself in the eye. I went back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I did cover the national championship game when Alabama played LSU, and I was trying. I couldn't remember. I was like, what did I write that day? What's the game story? It's not on the digital archives in 1997. I might have to go back in my newspaper file to find it. Yeah, it was. And to your point, it's a party. It's a celebration, and it goes on for a week and a half. And let me tell you, Omaha's a beautiful city. Omaha, Nebraska is a beautiful city. I like the Women's College World Series in softball. I'm into that like 5 or 6 times.
Is that in Oklahoma City? Is that in Oklahoma City? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they've got a nice little area called Bricktown with great restaurants and clubs, and they got a cool zoo and a little lake where you get these swan pedal boats. It's really awesome because of the environment, because of the day. And to your point, like you're right, you could get back and your team plays in the afternoon, but you want to go to the 1:00 game, and it's kind of spread out over a pretty long period of time. And if they've got this cool little downtown region, much like the Braves have around their stadium right now. So, and you know what? And you're not that far away. Listen, you realize Ole Miss finished under 500 in the SEC. Ole Miss at one point I think was 5-9 this year. Oh, and they're one game away from playing in the championship series.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia beat the best team in baseball this year was Tennessee. Georgia beat them 8-3 in front of the sold-out crowd with a guy that throws 104 miles an hour and the school's all-time saves leader. And Georgia beat them 8-3. I mean, Georgia lost on got knocked out eventually by a guy robbing a home run and their ace pitcher had gotten. But what if he doesn't get hurt? I mean, you're not that far away, and that's what makes it so hard for the Georgia baseball fans that are here to hear, well, we got to do the tennis facility first. So we got to wait another year before you're going to do something about the facilities. Because here's what you don't know about Georgia baseball. Foley Field is great, but the facilities are awful. They're probably the 13th out of 14 teams in the – they're terrible. The batting cages are archaic. There is no pitching lab. It is god-awful. The other thing you don't know, it's something that I recently found out, Brandon, is you say to yourself, well, wait a minute now. You got all these kids from Georgia. You got this in-state advantage. Well, actually, you don't. Because these other schools in the SEC have something called an out-of-state waiver. So they can give the kids from Georgia the same pricing to go to their school in-state, even though they're from another state. Georgia doesn't do that. If you want to recruit a kid from another state, they're paying out-of-state. And you're going, wait a minute, but they're on scholarship. No, they're not. There's only 11.7 scholarships for 27 players. All of these players are paying to a degree, and 13 of them are paying the whole bill out of their pocket. 40 guys on the team, only 27. So this is a factor. Georgia is doing this to themselves. So yeah, you're right, Brandon. Everybody wants to see it. There's a plan in place, but it's still 2 or 3 years off before they finally get these facilities that are going to put them on a level playing field.
All right, Mike, good stuff. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management today. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from you there at DawgNation.com and, of course, chatting with you again very soon there as well.
Thanks, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I mean, I realize there's a whole pocket of Georgia fans that are sort of only interested in football, and I got no problem with you. You're free to like what you like. That's fine with me either way, and obviously we're a show that's always going to be like 99% devoted to football because that's what the audience wants to hear. This is not a hobby. We're doing this for, as Kevin Kisner would say, this ain't no hobby. We're not doing this as a hobby. We're doing this for jobs. We're going to serve the audience what it wants. But privately, selfishly, I want to go to Omaha, man. That just looks like so much fun. It just looks like so much fun. Maybe one of these days we'll get a chance to do that. Take the show on the road to Omaha, Nebraska. I would have a great time with all of that. And speaking of having a great time, you yourself will have a great time there as well if you head out on the open seas here in 2022, maybe even this summer on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Like, how much fun does that sound to be, in the Bahamas, to be going down to St. Thomas or St. Martin or heading over to the private destination there in Haiti known as Labadee. Like, there are so many cool places that Royal Caribbean's going. Perfect Day Coco Cay. You've heard me talk about that a bunch. But the ship itself is also cool there as well. And that's the one thing you can't lose sight of, is that the ship itself is a destination. You've heard it said that, it's life's a journey, not a destination. Well, it's the journey on the cruise. It's actually so much of the fun because of all the things that Royal Caribbean has on its cruise ship. So you're watching on video, you saw like the flow rider on the back of the ship, which is kind of like a wave simulator, like a surf simulator. You got like the lime and coconut and so many other cool like bars spread all over the place. For those of you that like pub crawls and things like that, like there's really no better way to do that than on one of these Royal Caribbean cruise ships. I've told you before that in February when I was on Harmony of the Seas, like at one point in time in the night, my wife and I went from like bar to bar to bar to bar. We heard live music being played at like 5 different places at one time. Like that's just kind of a fun night out. And you're getting that on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship to go along with everything else that comes with that great vacation. So my encouragement to you is to go ahead and get booked up and get on your own Royal Caribbean cruise here today. Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can help you do that. TCAVA.com, TCAVA.com, or call 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. So this is the portion of the show you're going to see a graphic. And you're going to say, oh, BA, y'all forgot to change the graphic from yesterday. But actually, we didn't need to change the graphic from yesterday because another day, same result, Ohio State has added another 5-star wide receiver, this time in the person of Brandon Ennis, big-time receiver prospect going the way of the Buckeyes. This is interesting because just yesterday, Ohio State got Carnell Tate. Obviously, that's one of the top receivers in the country. And getting Ennis the day after that, once again, another really big deal. You'll remember, of course, that Ennis at one point in time was seemingly on Georgia's radar, or Georgia was on his radar. We talked last week about the fact that Ennis had really strongly remarked when Georgia hired Brian McClendon as wide receivers coach, but last week when Ennis put out his top 6, he did not have Georgia among that group, and he becomes another one of these guys that chooses Ohio State. And listen, we don't like the Buckeyes. A lot of folks don't, but you got to call them like you see them. We try to call balls and strikes around here. Ohio State is just dominating wide receiver recruitment, and they are dominating production from receivers on the field there as well, sending these guys into the NFL draft there as well. They are cornering the market on that position in a really remarkable way. In fact, why was it that Alabama was even able to get a Jamison Williams a year ago, who was such a pivotal part of their offense? And as Alabama fans would say it, the only reason they had a chance to win any game, literally impossible to win a game that he didn't play in. How did that program get to be that point? Well, a guy like Williams was just floundering on the bench at Ohio State. I mean, that's bizarre, right? To think that they've got so much talent, that Jamison Williams so easily and quickly became the face of the Alabama program. They had no chance of winning games in which he was hurt, and yet at Ohio State, he was just kind of a bench guy, kind of a rotational guy. That's how deep they've been at wide receiver, and now Tate and Ennis in back-to-back days shows you that position coach Brian Hartline, head coach Ryan Day, they show no signs of slowing down on any of this anytime soon. And as we talked about off the top of the program, that does sort of lead you to the question of what does that mean for the Buckeyes on the field this year? Now, obviously, no Ennis and Tate playing for them right now. We understand that. But this reputation so well earned of dominant wide receiver, guys like Julian Fleming, who we've always liked around here, he's had a hard time finding a home there at Ohio State for much the same kind of stuff. Maybe he gets more of a chance here this year. But what does this add up to? Is this one of those things where Ohio State really on the back of what is a great and dominant offense, they just ride that to more success? Or is this one of those things where, bringing in the defensive coordinator from Oklahoma State and kind of trying to add that version of complementary football to their offensive profile, do they falter there in that regard? As we said, does the lack of physicality that hurt them in the game against Michigan a year ago, does all this dominant wide receiver play kind of leave them more easily exploited in other areas? Because there's no such thing in life of having no trade-off. Getting better in one area is going to hurt you somewhere else. And hard not to notice that teams like Ohio State and Alabama, that as they've made their program more offensive-oriented, more wide receiver-oriented, the program has suffered in other ways. I mean, think about like the overhead shot, the spider cam that slides around the top of the field for a moment. Think about the spider cam looking down the action. When your best players are wide receivers, they are lining up a long way away from the football. And to me, that's always a concern when you are best far from the football. because there's a lot of action around the football that determines what wide receivers even have the chance to be able to do. And it sounds like I'm, poo-pooing Ohio State, recruiting these wide receivers. Clearly I'm not. It's good to have a niche in life, and this is the niche the Buckeyes have created for themselves. But what does it produce in terms of winning? It's fair to point out it has not produced much as of late, and there's going to be a big spotlight on what that does for Ryan Day here this upcoming season. Ryan Day has not won squat since he's been the Ohio State head coach. He is universally heaped praise upon because there's just a bias in favor of offensive coaches, but he hasn't done anything yet since being Buckeyes coach. This is a year where he needs to do that, but they are clearly killing it in recruiting when it comes to receivers, and Ennis just the latest example of that. And I know some folks up there near that Columbus program, and they really think that Ennis has a chance to be very good too. And you hear that from time to time, but sometimes you hear it a little bit more, and there's a lot of specific praise coming the way of Ennis. Would not surprise. I think some people that I know closer to Ohio State would not surprise them if Ennis is not better than Cornell Tate. So just keep that in mind there too. Another piece of recruiting news, Florida has added a 4-star commit. We certainly mock Florida when it, takes a bunch of 3 stars or transfers from Louisiana Lafayette or whatever else. But in this particular case, they do add a 4-star Isaiah Nixon to like a top 200 level recruit type guy. He has been added into the 2023 fold there for the Gators. Now, if you go to like 24/7 Sports, one of these websites that like ranks recruiting rankings, you still see the Gators right there just above like the line of demarcation. Are you familiar with like baseball, the old like Mendoza line? Like you don't want to be below the Mendoza line when it comes to a batting average. The football recruiting version of that is that when you scroll on one of these like national recruiting websites, you see like the first 50 teams, and then below that you have to click to see additional teams. Like you want to make sure you're above the top 50, otherwise you're kind of below the see additional teams mark, and that's never where you want to be. So Florida right now just staying right there above that see additional teams label when it comes to the national recruiting websites. But they do add a 4-star pass rusher in Isaiah Nixon to the program. And also, just briefly, let me do this. We talked yesterday a little bit about Stetson Bennett going to the Manning Passing Academy in Louisiana. New Orleans Times Picayune had written about that. I wanted to give you the other SEC quarterbacks who are going to be there because there are going to be a lot of them. It's Will Levis from Kentucky, Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, Anthony Richardson from Florida, Will Rogers from Mississippi State, Mike Wright from Vanderbilt. I have no idea who that is. Bryce Young from Alabama. Luke Altmaier from Ole Miss. And by the way, let me just say this real quickly. We talked about this on one of my vacation shows a few weeks ago. Watch Altmaier here for a moment. That's a quarterback for Ole Miss out of Starkville. That's obviously the town of Mississippi State, the big Ole Miss rival. It is not obvious that Jackson Dart's going to be Ole Miss's starting quarterback. Keep your eye on Luke Altmaier. That's worth mentioning. Miles Brennan from LSU, Hendon Hooker from Tennessee, KJ Jefferson from Arkansas. Jefferson had a really interesting write-up with Brandon Marcello the other day at 24/7 Sports about his belief in himself for the upcoming season. I thought it was kind of interesting. Then also Max Johnson from Texas A&M. So a lot of SEC quarterbacks represented at that Manning Passing Academy, and a chance for Stetson Bennett to kind of rub elbows with those guys and show off a national championship ring. So that'll be kind of an interesting to see what kind of emerges from that, if anything. But a lot of big-name quarterbacks in the SEC all there together. And by the way, Georgia plays a lot of these guys this season. Levis and Rattler and Richardson and Rogers, maybe Bryce Young eventually, obviously Hendon Hooker. Georgia plays a lot of those quarterbacks that are kind of thought to be at that sort of Manning passing camp level there. We'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And really quickly, I just want to give you a reminder here that for as much action as there's been around recruiting for Georgia here in the month of June, it does not really show any signs of slowing down, at least anytime soon. Eventually we'll get to July. There'll be a little bit of a dead period there where visits will stop, but guys will still sort of ponder their fact-finding missions they've been on in June, and some of these guys obviously are heading towards July decisions. But for now, visits roll on, including one for a big-time pass rusher, Samuel Mpemba, on social media this week, letting us know that he's got a visit taking place to Georgia, putting this out yesterday that he's visiting Georgia today. So that from Mpemba, a name worth paying attention to and watching. So big visits continue to roll on, and some of these midweek visits kind of taking place, which is an interesting thing to see. So Mpemba back on campus there for the Dogs. I'm sure Jeff Santel will have plenty for you on that at DawgNation.com. Here's what I've got for you there as well. Obviously, always a great time to toast the recruiting wins that Georgia continues to enjoy. Recruits themselves can't toast yet. They're not 21, but we all can. And so we'll celebrate that in style with our friends, the Finnish Long Drink. And I was telling somebody the other day, I just really love the finished long drink during the time of year when you're outside a lot more. This time of year, I am outside at the pool, whatever else. You get one of those like really nice coolers. Yeah, some of y'all have these. I've got one of these like these coolers. I don't even know how they work, but they keep the cans like ultra cold, and I just love that. And like a really, really super cold finished long drink, man, that is just good stuff. So if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out where you can pick some up today, whether it's the cranberry or the long drink strong, the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, long drink traditional. It's a blue can. It's a grapefruit flavor, a gin kick. It sort of looks like a beer, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. For those of you that like mixed drinks, this is a mixed drink in a can. You can enjoy some today. So go to thelongdrink.com, and you can find out where you can pick some up and enjoy this great, great new category of beverage, the ready-to-drink cocktail, the finished long drink, coming from Helsinki, going back to the 1950s, been in America now for a couple of years, and now in Georgia all over the place. So go to thelongdrink.com. You can find out where you can pick some up. So Golden Shoe today, a continuation of an ongoing conversation for a lot of Georgia fans of why it is that Georgia, in the midst of all these alternate uniforms that recruits wear, why the one thing that seemingly every Georgia fan's in agreement on, like that meme or like that emoji that people use, like the handshake emoji, like old school Georgia fans, new school Georgia fans, everybody wants Georgia to wear like shiny silver britches the way the program used to. And there's never really been a good explanation for why that doesn't happen. Well, that's kind of the theme of our Golden Shoe today. Our buddy George on Tap, who always shares some cool stuff with us, shared us this there as well, that I guess Nike has made a kind of specific like sort of signature shoe for the Georgia Bulldogs. So we have the shoe to show for today. And if you look on here, first of all, it's a really cool thing. It's got the score of the title game on the tongue of the shoe, which is a great thing to see. But as Georgia on Tap points out, it is a shiny silver on the, like the exterior of the shoe. So if you can do that for a leather shoe, why couldn't you do that for football pants? He asked the question. I think it's a provocative one, and hopefully eventually we will get an answer. But until then, we will give Georgia on Tap a golden shoe for today. We'll also remind you that on tap for the Gators, more misery. It's been 4,911 days since they've won a national championship, and that's going to be continuing for a long time to come. And 129 days from now, Dogs back in Jacksonville, beating up on the Gators again. We will see you tomorrow. That is our Gator Countdown, by the way. And we will see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews can do for you today. I'm going to beg your pardon here and probably not go crazy long on comments. Maybe we'll go longer tomorrow, maybe. My son is at a basketball camp. I'm going to try to get over there and see if I can see him play basketball for a minute. So I'm not going to go crazy long on comments, but I do want to be respectful because this is, after all, what we do for a living. So let's make sure that we do, a good amount of time here, but probably not going to go crazy on all of that today. Anyway, hope you're doing well. Let me go to YouTube first because I do not believe I've started on YouTube first yet this week. Let's see what's going on. Boy, G. Grace, man, he plays the heel in this comment section as well as anything, dude. Brock says those shoes are ugly. Georgia color ain't silver. Brock, Georgia's been wearing silver britches forever. I mean, don't even get me started on this. Look, you come in here and talk trash, and I've got a pretty high tolerance for that. But you can't have factual inaccuracies. Now, are the shoes themselves ugly? I mean, I think the thing you don't like about it is that 33-18 score that's right there on the center. That's probably the part that you find the most distasteful, but that's probably the thing that a lot of Georgia fans like. Are those shoes a little too new school for me? Maybe so. But is silver a Georgia color? Of course silver is a Georgia color. And you know what else is a Georgia color now? Gold, as in the national championship trophy that Georgia yanked from the Alabama Crimson Tide back in Indianapolis. Maybe you saw the game. G. Grace, man, always says to Cousin Eddie, enjoy your national title, but don't lie to folks. We all know why you won that game. G. Grace, man. I think it's funny to watch the Alabama fans. At one point in time, Georgia fans were accused of living in the past. And listen, I love G. Grace. I really do. But at one point in time, Georgia fans were sort of accused of living in the past. don't y'all think it's really interesting the way in which Alabama fans have been relegated to living in like the recent past? Like Alabama fans have such a nostalgia for December. It's really amazing, right? It's like they just long for the glory days of December 2021. Life has not been quite as good for them since then. But man, they have a lot of nostalgia for December 2021, which I think is really interesting. Let's see what else. Howard Eubanks on YouTube says the kindergarten sandbox is busy today. It certainly seems to be that way. Spencer Clark says, can Tennessee bounce back with Josh? I just think so, not with his current quarterback. Yeah, I mean, I told you the other day, I thought it was really interesting that to the extent that you care about gambling markets and things like that, when some of these Nevada sports books, and sometimes I think the Nevada sports books, when they put out their opening lines, are a little more interesting because they are more likely to take a big bet on some of their totals. Now, in some respects, if it's the wrong kind of gambler, they won't take the bet at all. But in some respects, the Nevada sports books will take just a little bit larger bet on a look-ahead line. So there's a little bit of a little extra handicapping that probably goes into that. And when they, I think it was made circa one of the big ones out there, and actually two of the big ones out there at one point in time, opened Tennessee as like only about a 6.5 point underdog hosting Alabama third Saturday in October. Now, in both instances, the line was bet up very quickly to double-digit points, 10.5, something along those lines. But there was a little bit of early respect for Tennessee in some of the gambling market stuff. You're not seeing as much of that for Tennessee at Georgia. It's a road game for the Vols. You're not seeing as much of that. But a little bit of respect for Tennessee hosting Alabama, which I thought was kind of interesting. What else? Jay Shipes taking time to weigh in here. I'll come back over here to YouTube in a second. That's a little bit of a cesspool right now. Let me go to Facebook. And listen, I don't mind y'all talking trash back and forth to each other. Sometimes it just gets hard for me to like come in on the conversation because y'all are like 87 comments deep with each other. And so it's a little bit hard for me to get the context. But y'all are certainly free to enjoy it however you want to. So here's another thing. Like every now and then I'll look on Facebook and like Chris Slim White's comment has been hidden. But it's not anything bad or anything. And I certainly didn't hide it. And I don't think anybody else. I mean, it's not like we got like an army of moderators around here. Like, I don't know why that's the case. So, Chris, your comment's hidden, but I didn't hide it. But what Chris says is, I can see it. Maybe y'all can't. It says, I don't know why y'all want us to go back to the silver. They were ugly. Actually, Chris, your comment should be hidden. If you thought the silver britches were ugly, then your comment should be hidden. So I'm glad it is hidden. I changed my mind on that. In all seriousness, do you really think they're ugly? Because I love them. I love them. Like early 90s era Georgia. Now, it's not a great team on the field necessarily, although the 92 team wasn't bad. You thought that was really ugly? Because I didn't think so. Randy Hall says we need a silver shoe award for certain fans. Actually, that'd be kind of cool if we get the Silver Britches Award. Part of me also kind of wants to give it like a Coffee County Hustle Award or something like that. I've thought about doing that before. Keith Fold says, I'd like an explanation as to why we don't have silver britches. Yeah, Keith, this is one of those things where ultimately it's actually not that important of a topic, but I am fascinated by the lack of satisfactory answer regarding it. It's one of those things where like the answers regarding this are so nonsensical that I almost wonder, wait, is there something actually going on here? Because it's one of the few things that most Georgia fans, and apparently not Chris Slim White, but most Georgia fans kind of seem to agree on. And when asked about this before, the answers are just bizarrely nonsensical. And it's not that important, but the lack of ability to provide a satisfactory answer regarding it sort of makes it almost seem more important to me. Ken Holcomb says, in the words of the saintly Larry Munson, go you silver britches. Yeah, so you talk about like old pieces of memorabilia. So my grandfather used to have an old pickup truck. And when you think about old pickup truck, this is an old pickup truck, like, you know, like the square front. I mean, that's like a true old pickup truck. And on the back of this very old pickup truck, he had a go you silver britches like bumper sticker. When I was a kid, I think that thing was so nice. I still would. I probably think it's nicer now than I did back then. But like, I don't know why I like that phrase so much. Go you silver britches. I'm trying to think like what else in college football is kind of like that. I guess like Notre Dame is sometimes called the Golden Domers, so they have a little bit of a nickname related to their uniform. But back in the 80s when people were saying "Go you silver britches," that's just a cool battle cry to me. I don't know why I like that so much. And I remember that bumper sticker on the back of his truck so vividly. And so, yeah, I kind of always have a little bit of a special thought on that. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that Georgia has silver britches trademarked. I'm pretty sure that it does. So it's at least something there on that. Randy Hall on the subject of Tate Ratledge's injury recovery. Yeah, there's going to be a good bit of that coming up from Kirby, SEC media days where, and actually what might be interesting is to go back and maybe listen. I'm thinking out loud here when I say this, to listen to some of Kirby's injury stuff from last year's media days and see how true it turned out to be. Because I sort of have, listen, we all love Kirby. I feel like Kirby sandbags on some of his injury stuff sometimes. And so it might be interesting to go back and listen to what he said about so-and-so is going to be fine or whatever else, and kind of who didn't turn out to be fine. That might actually end up being a nice benchmark to kind of go back and compare that to. Maybe we'll do that at some point in time. Let's see what Hugh Nash says. YouTube is a cesspool. Truer words have never been spoken. That's funny. Joseph Kennedy says silver britches were the best, but oh well, they seem to be gone for good. Good to see Miriam Corbin in here today. Lynn Johnson Shipman says the silver britches were beautiful, showing you that Lynn, of course, has great taste. Scotty Barnes says hunker down, you silver britches. I like that. Mark Davis says I like the silver britches, but the glitter on those shoes is still a little much for me. Yeah, I'm not wearing like true dad sneakers for the most part, but like some of these like really aggressive sneakers that young people seem to like today, I just can't get behind that. And I don't mind being, off trend when it comes to something like that. Like I like a fairly plain shoe, not like that, true like dad sneaker. That's not what I'm wearing, but I'm also not going to wear something that's got a bunch of, whatever to it either. Chris Lim White, he says, that's okay, BA. He says, we like some of the new jerseys, but you don't. Yeah, that's certainly fair. And that's why, I like uniform talk because I think it's fine for everybody to have a lot of opinions. I really do. I really do. Let me go over to DawgNation.com for a minute. And then we got like 3 more minutes left. Brad Hotton says that Ohio State successfully trademarked the word the. Did they really do that? That's funny. As in the Ohio State University. That's pretty funny. Jacob Yarborough says, here's a crazy stat for you. In Kirby's tenure, only once has a quarterback thrown over 40 times in a Dogs victory. Jacob Eason in 2016 against Missouri. That's actually really interesting. That's a very interesting stat, Jacob. And that 2016 season in so many ways just feels like such an outlier, right? I mean, it's like, it's just such a different version of Georgia football than what it grew into. Really good stat, though. Cat Story checks in to say sick and BA. Appreciate that. Rodney says that DawgNation's going to gush over Kirby Smart's $100 million contract, but they constantly claim kids getting a few extra bucks from NIL will ruin college football. Shaking my head. So, Rodney, I understand where that comes from, and I actually imagine there's probably going to be a little bit of, not from Georgia fans necessarily, but I think there's going to be a little negativity around the Smart contract because it is coming at a time in which there appears to be a little bit of an imbalance between, how coaches are paid and, kind of the stuff, regarding players. And like, I know that my opinion on this probably seems somewhat complicated, and I apologize for not being able to make it more simple. But the truth is like, I don't mind any player getting whatever he can get. I really don't. Like, I'm not, necessarily against players getting paid. But I do believe that the current landscape that we're in, like, threatens the stability of college football, and the stability is what provides it its strength. So, if you told me the only way that I could preserve the future of college football is to be somewhat unfair to current players, I don't mind telling you I'd do that. I really would. And that may seem, harsh, whatever else. I'm just being honest with you that I think the future of college football, it being able to exist as a powerful thing, as a change agent, turning boys into men, its ability to be able to do that, I want that to last for a lot longer. And I do think, like, the current age that we're in has the potential ability to threaten all of that. Not because the players are getting money, but in my belief, because we're deputizing sort of a new category of stakeholder in the sport, like the sort of NIL figure, and I'm just not quite so sure I want that person as involved in college football as they currently are. And that's where I think some of the challenge comes in here. But I totally get where you're coming from on it's hypocritical that Smart makes $100 million, or at least he's about to, when there's this debate about what the players deserve and what they ought to be getting. I get the incongruity related to all of that. I do. It sounds like we probably see the world a little bit differently, but I at least understand where your point of view is coming from. Jacob O'Neill says, I love finished long drink. Yum, yum. Jacob, I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate that. BA's Listing Face says, how about a Ringo Award for the UGA recruiter who intercepts the best talent from Bama's backyard? I like that. A little James Smith, a little Quay Rusala maybe later on. Calling that a Ringo type situation, or giving out a Ringo Award for intercepting them from Bama. I like that. Matt Rukavina says 2016 was a transition year. It felt more like Kirby was babysitting Mark Richt's players. He hadn't introduced his culture yet. I think that's true, Matt. I also think it's one of those things where Georgia was in the midst of trying to institute a culture, and it just was taking, a little while. Like, go back and rewatch the Nichols game if you have the stomach for it. Like, Georgia was trying to ground and pound with Nichols, and they were having a very hard time doing that. It just goes to show you, man, it was a tough time. Tough time. All right, very quickly over here on YouTube, and then we're gone for today. Scully Reddy mentioning Anthony Richardson for Florida. Listen, I think the Richardson situation is a pretty interesting storyline here this year. I mean, if Florida is better than we think they're going to be, I actually think that probably comes more because of what, say, Javon Dexter does defensively than what a Richardson does offensively. But this is one of the things that I gather from a few hundred miles away that Florida fans disliked about Dan Mullen almost as much as anything else, is that Mullen was really slow to let go of Emory Jones when Florida fans really wanted to move on to Anthony Richardson. And you compare the way in which Billy Napier discussed Richardson this past spring. Now, he didn't really have another option, so maybe that's what colored his language. But Napier was very clearly all in on Richardson this spring in a way that Dan Mullen kind of never was last year for Florida. So I do think that Richardson's a pretty interesting figure for the upcoming season. I do. Benny Wise says, we love DawgNation here from Athens, Georgia. Benny, that's awesome to hear. Thank you so much, Benny. I really appreciate that. Foster Moss says, are you going to the Braves-Dodgers game on Sunday? I am not doing that on Sunday. I actually have a pretty busy weekend, but I am going to the series finale against the Giants tomorrow afternoon. I'm looking forward to that. Let's see what else. Jerry Dogs fan says, do you think that Stetson Bennett puts up better numbers this year or gets replaced? I think Stetson putting up better numbers would be my bet there on that. I think it's certainly possible if he doesn't play well, he would get replaced because that's just kind of the way that things go at Georgia, at least if there's a worthy candidate to take his place. But I think that betting on Bennett to have better numbers probably sounds about right. Chase Spitzer says he'd like to see Nick Saban become college football commissioner. A lot of people say this. I guess, Chase, here's my issue on that. I sort of feel like that some of the stuff that Saban has talked about in recent years in terms of rule changes or evolutions, it always seems to be more about what benefits him at Alabama more so than what benefits the sport overall. Comparatively speaking, and maybe this is just red and black glasses that I'm seeing this through, but comparatively speaking, I feel like that some of the stuff that Kirby Smart says really does seem to kind of come from the place of kind of a vision that he has for the sport beyond just what's good for UGA. And I don't quite know that I'm hearing that from Saban quite as much where, I mean, some of the stuff, when he talked about, hey, we should get back to a thing of parity in college football, people just sort of laughed that off because, I mean, Alabama has benefited as much from anybody as not having any parity in the sport. That, I mean, I just think a lot of the stuff that Saban has said in terms of the evolution of college football has been so easily falsifiable that I don't know. I don't know that he's quite the statesman in the late stage of his career that I wish he would be. But it's an interesting point. Antonio Jones says that Saban is good for college football. I mean, as a blueprint and a template for what works, I don't think there's any denying that. And this is where even someone like me that likes taking jabs at Bama fans and certainly likes taking jabs at Saban when I can, you have to admit that Saban is not only successful, he has given you really a checklist, a to-do list of what success looks like in almost any walk of life. You have to acknowledge that. Kevin Witter says that Saban's realized his stranglehold on the SEC and recruiting has slipped. I think Kevin's probably right about that, and I think that Saban's response to that has not necessarily always been the most dignified. All right, so a good conversation. Glad to be able to do that. Thanks for being here there as well. Aftermath of yesterday's runoff elections in Georgia. You can find out more about that online at ajc.com. You can enjoy all of that and find that out. I told you about the Braves' ongoing series against the Giants. A very interesting measuring stick. Low-scoring game going back to Tuesday, I should say Monday. High-scoring game there last night. So kind of a lot of action taking place there with the Giants here right now. Spencer Strider, after really looking really good, did not look quite so good yesterday. Honesty compels you to admit, so you can read more about that online at ajc.com and check that out. And, of course, everything else there as well. Getting ready for the weekend, stuff like that. Always fun to do that online, ajc.com there as well. R.S. Andrews, make sure you find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning unit, get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That is good stuff. You're going to enjoy it. It's good to feel cool and comfortable inside your home, and R.S. Andrews gives you a chance to do that. With an air conditioning unit that might be a little tired, that might be at its shelf life, R.S. Andrews got you covered on all of that. Y'all have a great day. We will see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.